What is up, guys? Frosty Aussie here today for another Frosty Features. Today we have the first member of our Orcus team, the one everybody keeps asking for, but then Scopely delivered it, and I don't really know if anybody actually cares. It feels like he should be a different character, and we'll talk about the different character a little bit in this, but anyway, our first member of the Orcus team is Sentinel. So we're going to talk about different Sentinels, etc. And so if you haven't been to Frosty Feature before, what this is comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I'm the guy to take you through the pages of comics past. According to Scopely, this is the lore description that is provided by the blog post by Scopely. We are going to read this and we will rate it at the end of the feature. Sentinel, created by Dr. Bolivar Trask and later advanced by various governments and organizations, Sentinels are humanoid robots designed to detect, capture, and eliminate mutants. These ruthless robots possess superhuman strength, durability, and advanced adaptive technology to counter mutant abilities. And though they're often several stories tall, the Sentinels of Marvel Strike Force are human-sized for their battlefield missions. So, with that, we've been talking in the last Frosty Features. I think it was the last one. We definitively proved that the lore of comic books matters in Marvel Strike Force. This is the first blog post that I'm aware of that I remember. This is episode, I think, 104, 105. Out of all of those videos, this is the first one of these that I've seen where they point out that their lore is different, right? Which is good, because it's all based on other things. So, not only does it says, and though they're often several stories tall, admitting that they're using reference material from somewhere else, the comics, the Sentinels of Marvel Strike Force are human-sized for their battlefield missions. Good for you. Good. That is it saying, in Marvel Strike Force, here's how the lore is different. They're admitting it on the blog post. I'm still right. After definitively proving that stuff in Frosty Features Ultimates, the last one, this still says that I'm correct. This says it in the post. We'll rate this at the end of the feature. Sentinels. That's a cool picture, right? Good font. I'm excited about this one a little bit. Name, Sentinel. There isn't one. That's the weird thing about Sentinels. I feel like from the beginning, Sentinels should have released as a minion. We don't get minions in the game anymore. They used to be quite often, way back in the day. Sentinels are a group of robots that are used for minion purposes. What we got in the game is Master Mold, kind of. Right? We got a Sentinel that summons other Sentinels. Right? Pretty much, we have Master Mold in the game, and they called it Sentinel. Spoiler alert. Right? Somebody said Baby Mold in the chat. First appearance, X-Men number 14, 1965. We only have 14 issues before we get the Sentinels introduced in the X-Men timeline. With their inclusion in the Orcus team, they predate Orcus by 40 years. More than that, actually. So that's a pretty interesting kind of thing, but what we'll find is the same story is told over and over and over again so that we have Sentinels, so it's really not that crazy. But yes, they've been all around for a very long time and are involved in a lot of things, but because they are a minion type character, they're involved in everything, but a lot of that is not. A lot of what they're involved in does not actually affect the story so much, just because they're kind of the throwaway character a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot of the time, because they're minions. Powers and abilities. So this isn't specific. So Sentinels, because there's such a wide array of them, this is sort of a general overview of what a typical Sentinels power set might be. So they are superhuman being beyond the abilities of a human being altogether. Speed is a little bit debatable on certain types of Sentinels because a lot of them are like 20 stories tall and giant. They're only fast for the fact that they cover large amounts of area when they walk. But with jet propulsion, things like that, they do sort of have a super speed. Not really reflexes, but definitely strength and definitely a durability. We've got energy blasts, flight, typically jet propulsion, but not always. Mutant detection is a big one for most models of Sentinels for the fact that like Days of Future Past hinges heavily on the fact that we have Sentinels and Super Sentinels and things like that. Being able to locate mutants is sort of their prime directive, right? Adaptability is another big one. So with adaptability, a lot of Sentinels have the ability to kind of instantly react to what's going on so that they can best certain types of mutants. Typically what the best way to look at Sentinels is they really are a way to they're made to control the population of mutants. So essentially when you have like a low power level mutant, these are sort of they're cops, right? Not even cops, they're like snatchers. They're huge oppressors, right? They're an aggressive force to weak mutants. They do cover all mutants, but when you have a mutants like Storm and things like that, a single Sentinel isn't going to do anything. So with that, and it actually kind of pertains to Marvel Strike Force, when the extra Sentinels come in, the way they take out stronger mutants is by numbers, right? And once again, these guys typically are like 20 stories tall. They're huge. So when they come in by the buttload, even strong mutants can be overtaken, and that's an important thing to remember. Aliases, hunters. So a lot they're referred to as hunters in a lot of conversation, especially in storylines, Age of Apocalypse, things like that reference Sentinels quite often. Affiliations, Orcus and AIM. Those are the two ones that I just wanted to throw out really quick. Orcus is obviously most applicable to Marvel Strike Force. AIM also, as Orcus kind of comes out of AIM a little bit. But also, their affiliations kind of span to whoever uses them. They are just robots, and essentially whoever comes in control of the robots. So the Hellfire Club has them for a while. Doom has a bunch of Sentinels for a while. Like, whoever's using this technology sort of automatically adapts their affiliation. So these two are kind of just the main ones we're going to talk about today, but they're actually affiliated with a lot of different teams. Background. I mean, they're American weaponry. The base is, I believe, North Dakota. North or South Dakota, one of the two. But ultimately, it's American. They're American weaponry. That's what they are. They're a weapon. They are not a character unto themselves. There are characters in them that are created and that have a personality that are types of Sentinels. We have them in the Orcus team. Nimrod being one of them. Omega Sentinel being another one that has... she's not exactly created, but she's built upon. But they have their own personalities and stuff. But for the most part, what Sentinel is in the game, what Sentinels are in the comics, are just they're robots that are a freaking problem. They're the thing to kill to get to the boss, right? They're the epitome of a minion. For some reason, they're not minions, and we, like I said earlier, we essentially have Master Mold in the game, but he's not called Master Mold. It would make a little bit more sense, but it's fine. We all know it. Who died? This is hard to say. We're going to talk about, you can't be a superhero or supervillain without somebody dying, right? That's the rules in comics. With this specific situation, it wasn't exactly that somebody died for the Sentinel to come into creation. It was the threat of a lot of people dying. They were made in response to the rise of mutants, right? And the fear that mutants are going to take over the world. So these were made so that humanity had a fighting chance against mutants. And in that, they were successful. They are a challenge, especially in their different forms and iterations, right? But they were made with the idea that people were going to be killed. I don't actually think in canon that humans were killed by mutants in such a way, like, not like mass wiped out at the point that this was made, that these were made, right? Because these were made, once again, they're made very early in the X-Men lore. They're made very early in the timeline as far as mutants are concerned, when they become into, part of the zeitgeist. So ultimately they were made in reaction to the potential that humans would be killed by mutants. And I'm sure there's probably a timeline somewhere where there was a lot of humans killed by mutants. And that's kind of a Mega Sentinel story. We'll talk about her in a different Frosty feature. In the actual, when Sentinels were first written, technically no one. It was kind of a racist reaction to the fact that mutants existed, and that's what mutants were written for in the comics, were to have a more palpable way to approach race in a time that race was so controversial in the 60s, right? So take from that with you what you will, but all of what I just said is factual. Okay, so that's what it is. So yes, moving on. Stark Sentinel. So sometimes, especially when we have these like if you look back at some of the different Tony Starks, the different Iron Man armors and things like that we have in Marvel Strike Force, I kind of bring up where the design comes from and things like that. So most notably, the design from Marvel Strike Force, the types of Sentinels that our Sentinel is based off of, really seem to be Stark Sentinels. So they look most similar to the type in game, but also the Stark Sentinels. So these are obviously Sentinels that are re-engineered by Tony Stark. These Stark Sentinels also are used by Orcus. So Orcus very specifically uses different types of Stark Sentinels based on these different advancements and things that are made. But as you can see here, Stark Sentinels are still quite big, but the design is most closely to that of the Stark Sentinels, and they are in the comics, they are used by Orcus, another big influencer. So within the context of the game, right, we can't just run around having giant characters fighting with our other 4 people in the teams. So we have our Sentinel being regular human size, and once again in the Marvel Strike Force lore, it points out that for the battlefield effect, or for their battlefield missions, they are smaller. There are also things that are called they're like box Sentinels, or the Hellfire Club Sentinels. They are human sized, and they are used essentially as bodyguards and servants and things like that. So and this only predates the Orcus storyline by a couple, like maybe not even a full year, right? So there also is precedent in the comics for having essentially regular people-sized Sentinels. So these are other things to consider. So the idea from the Hellfire Club Sentinels and the majority of the design from the Stark Sentinels that are actually used by Orcus, that's kind of what we're seeing in the game. So usually this is relationships, but this is a robot. So I put in some of the alternative models. These are not all of them. These are the ones that I could just name off the top of my head. So marks 1 through 6, we always talk about with Iron Man armors, or different versions of armors, Iron Patriot, things like that. We talk about the different versions that exist. 1 through 6 being the actual Sentinels. That one where it's the Hellfire Club one, that's technically mark 10. So they kind of go all over the place, but most notably 1 through 6. Master Mold is a version of a Sentinel who creates other Sentinels. He's a big deal. Nimrod being like the ultimate Sentinel that's like multiversal and freaking crazy powerful. Also in the Orcus team, Master Mold I keep referencing as the Sentinel that our Sentinel in game is most like. Prime Sentinels, Wild Sentinels being able to kill like thousands of mutants at once. They're giant and they're heavily adaptive. Nano Sentinels, essentially virus-sized Sentinels that are super small. Tri-Sentinels typically don't go after mutants, so these are Sentinels that are essentially just going after different meta-humans. Most specifically, more often than not, you'll see them going after Spider-Man. It's a Sentinel with 3 heads. Inhuman Sentinels go after Inhuman Sentinel, Zero, Lativiathans. So these are Dr. Doom's Sentinels at Latveria. We've got Box Sentinels and Stark Sentinels. So that's not all of them. Those are just the most notable ones that come off the top of my head, right? As I was trying to list them out. So there's a couple lists out there of these different Sentinels, and none of them are complete. So definitely check them out. There's a whole bunch of cool variants. Wild Sentinels are pretty crazy, right? And actually we'll reference Wild Sentinels a little bit here in notable events. So, notable events. we're gonna talk about the origin of Sentinels. It's kind of touched on a little bit in the blog post. So with our origin of Sentinels, this is the cover from the very first. This is X-Men number 15, where we see, or excuse me, 14. This is the first appearance of a Sentinel, right? So we've got a little bit of a different color motif. Our head is a little designed different, and once again, this could be considered the Mark 1, right? So we're just seeing this the first time. So ultimately, what this story is about is Dr. Bolivar Trask, notably played by Peter Dinklage in the Fox X-Men movies. But so ultimately, Trask was afraid. Trask is a human being that was very good at robotics. And in the 60s, you know, the rise of mutants, the awareness that mutants exist, things like that, he becomes nervous, essentially. He becomes nervous that their powers and their rise will rise up, they'll take over humanity, and humanity will be powerless to do anything about it because humans don't have powers, whereas mutants do, right? So it becomes this, mutants are a different race, we need to figure out how to deal with them, what do we do, right? So with that, his goal is to put humanity on equal footing, and then there's a point. So another big thing that you know, I talk about, if you get on my streams, and we talk about the MCU, I talk about how Reed Richards can come in, how they can make the Doctor Doom thing work, how they can do all this stuff. Reed Richards always, you know, I know I'm sitting here talking about the X-Men, and you're like, why the heck is he talking about Reed Richards? Reed Richards has his hand in affecting pretty much everything in the Marvel Universe one way or the other because of how much influence he as a character has. So, in this time, Reed Richards writes a paper in response to the oncoming of Galactus, which we've talked about in a previous Frosty feature. In his response to the oncoming of Galactus, Reed Richards writes a paper on how important it is to defend, to work together and defend humanity. And in this defense of humanity, Reed is he writes his paper, and people read it, and then people that are hating on mutants read it, and they're like, oh, hey, you know, he's right. Mutants aren't human, though, so we need to do something about it. So after this paper comes out, the United States government's like, yo, let's bring some people together, and let's figure out how to deal with this, you know, this mutant thing, or this alien thing, or whatever's coming our way. So they assemble essentially a team. Most notably at this conference is Dr. Bolivar Trask. They've got Thunderbolt Ross. They've got who was the third person I wanted to bring up? They bring in Howard Stark. And so with that, they're like, yo, and there's a couple more, but those are the most notable names. And they're like, hey, what do we gotta do? What do we gotta do to be able to defend ourselves against these sort of oncoming situations, whatever? And they're like, I don't know, but we're gonna do something, and it's gonna have to be our technology. We're gonna have to double down. And they're like, okay, well, we're all gonna go work on our own, go our own ways and kind of go about finding out our own things. And you know, Howard Stark obviously leads to building different types of weapons, becoming a weapons manufacturer. Thunderbolt Ross, he's a general, so we start seeing his eventually we see the Thunderbolts come from him, and then with Trask, we see him developing these different types of robots that their intent is to be able to protect against what's going on. But lo and behold, our friend Bolivar Trask has children, and in his children, he has a son and a daughter, and his son's name is Larry Trask. And Larry is a mutant, and so is his daughter. They're both mutants, and Larry, his daughter develops essentially teleportation power, and she poofs and disappears, and he doesn't know where she went. And Larry has future sight. And so with Larry, he's very concerned about this future sight or whatever, and he develops a robotic medallion that helps suppresses his son's powers, and he makes his son wear them. But because of this, and that based on some of Larry's future sight, Trask decides that mutants are in fact going to rise up and take over. They're going to rise up and they're going to take over humans. So what needs to happen is they need to develop a robot that will stomp out this mutant scourge once and for all. So he begins work on the first Sentinel. So what he does for the first Sentinel is he creates the first Master Mold. So when it comes to characters like Nimrod in Master Mold or what have you, these are robots that are working at a specific level, right? And they have a certain level of consciousness, but there's more than one Master Mold in the universe over time. Master Mold essentially is a class of a Sentinel, right? So a Master Mold is a Sentinel that makes more Sentinels. It is an AI that may adapt how the Sentinels are made, may upgrade these Sentinels, and creates more Sentinels, right? Nimrod's kind of a similar situation, but he's a little bit more like Ultron, where he's upgrading himself, but also implementing the creation of new and more advanced Sentinels, right? So with Master Mold, we have the first Master Mold come out, and he's making these Sentinels, and Trask sticks them on the X-Men and all sorts of mutants, and they start trying to police them, and the X-Men kind of fight back, and what happens is we fight back towards, they get to Master Mold, and lo and behold, thanks to how AI works in the 60s, all of the AI is like, oh, the humans need to die, not just the mutants, because if there are humans, there's more the chance for them to become humans, because, or excuse me, if they're humans, there's a chance for them to become mutants, because mutants are just mutation of humanity, therefore we need to kill them all. And Trask is like, oh no, I made an oopsie, this isn't great. And the X-Men are able to take out the Master Mold and kind of stop the Sentinels as it is. And Trask redeems himself sort of in the comics, and he's like, oh, I was wrong the whole time. I misunderstood, and I was short-sighted and kind of bigoted, but you've opened my eyes, X-Men. You were actually trying to protect us. Thank you so much for your service. But at this point, Pandora's box has already been opened, because my man has already created Sentinels and has a precedent for what a Master Mold is. So all it takes is for somebody else to get these plans and continue on, right? So that's sort of how the Sentinels come to be. That's sort of the first thing that they're used in, and that's how it's kind of foiled. But then from there, everybody, there's revivals. Trask comes back and forth on whether or not he actually forgives them. And other people get a hold of the technology, or Master Molds remake themselves, or Nimrods come from different dimensions, or alternate futures, and it just keeps going from there. So ultimately, let's fast forward a lot, right? Sentinels coming into the Orcus team in Marvel Strike Force. So I want to talk about Orcus a little bit, because Orcus is actually fairly new in the context of Marvel Comics. Orcus kind of, I believe its origins are in 2018, 2019, right in there. It's it's fall. It's not the fall of X, but it's they follow the Genosian massacre, right? So we're gonna talk about Fall of X and some of the events that lead to Fall of X, but essentially what Orcus is as a group, as a company, right? Because that sort of really follows what we've got going. So the Genosian massacre, Genosha, essentially there was an island that mutants were heavily they were like charted to. They were put in encampments, more or less. It was taken over. It was destroyed by Magneto, and then it became this sort of safe haven for mutants, and it became a country, Genosha. And then what had happened was somebody sent a giant wild Sentinel, and this was the first one we've seen, and it's a heavily adaptive giant Sentinel to kill all these people in Genosha. And it went over there, and it's called the Genosian Massacre because it is the biggest death of mutants in one go. It's like 16 million mutants that are killed by this Sentinel, right? And they just absolutely and utterly decimate this place, and it's like the 23rd time that mutants have almost become extinct by some event in Marvel. So the mutants are in shambles, and an AIM scientist named Dr. Alia Gregor writes a paper, and also, let me know if this sounds familiar, right? She writes a paper, and she's like, yo, due to the powers of the mutants, how much they've been able to regroup in the past, in 10 years, they'll be able to reconvene, repopulate, grow, and take over the planet, right? They're going to be able to take us all over in 10 years, even though we almost wiped them out in this one run. We need to be ready. We need to plan and be ready for this kind of comeback of theirs, right? So this paper turns into this blueprint by a different doctor, Killian Devo. What had happened here was we have a scientist that is in control. She is brainwashed. She's being mentally controlled by the Omega Sentinel, which is a Sentinel from an alternate timeline where mutants do take over the world. Right? She's a member of the Orcus team in Marvel Strike Force. She's come to 616 to wreak some havoc, right? So she brain controls this doctor, and the doctor decides, yo, we're gonna make a team, and we're gonna pull people and base things off of different big organizations. So I've listed out the organizations here. You've got Shield, Strike, Sword, Armor, AIM, Alpha Flight, Hammer, and Hydra. And we're gonna pull people from all of these different places that we can hire. We're gonna make a structure very similar to that, and we're gonna call it Orcus. And Orcus's main goal, from Devil's perspective, Orcus's main goal is to be able to contain this mutant problem before they rise and they take us over, right? So with that, Orcus is made, and what they do, they're not interested in making a master mold, right? Master molds make Sentinels. So what they do is they create a space station that is called the Mother Mold, and what the Mother Mold does is a giant. It's actually, there's a picture in Marvel Strike Force. It's a giant head inside of a metallic circle. That's Mother Mold. And what Mother Mold does is so if Master Mold makes Sentinels, Mother Mold makes Master Molds. So they're mass producing Master Molds so they can mass produce Sentinels, like mega mass produce Sentinels, right? So with this kind of intention, they're making armies and armies of Master Molds and Sentinels so that they can take over the world. But lo and behold, everybody else is kind of noticing things aren't going super hot with this. So with this Mother Mold, they also make a new version of Nimrod. So all of a sudden, we've got a whole bunch of Master Molds, the Mother Mold, Omega Sentinel, and Nimrod all working together with essentially AIM, Orcus, to try to kind of go against the mutants. So the way this is presented is Orcus approaches the mutant kind. There's only a few of them left, right? Because the Genosha Massacre, they're in shambles, whatever. And Professor X has risen as the leader, Cyclops has risen as the leader, and of course Magneto. And Orcus comes out, and they're like, yo, listen, for every mutant that's on Earth, we have this army of Sentinels, whatever. For every mutant that's on Earth, we're going to kill a human. And we're going to keep doing that until all of the mutants and humans are contained so that we can save humanity. Or you can use these portals and move your mutants off planet. And Professor X, being a super smart, in the Illuminati, right? We all saw the Scarlet Witch scene. He looks at that and he goes, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. Let's go off planet. We're gonna go through these portals. It'll be fine. So he starts ushering these mutants through, because he doesn't see another option. And so he starts ushering these mutants through these portals, and 250,000 more mutants are killed by these tampered with situations. And with that, with the success of this, and further limiting this very small population, Orcus is finally revealed to be being run by Nimrod and Omega Sentinel, and their true intention is to kill all of humanity and just have a planet of robots, and that's going to be super cool. So then all of a sudden, we have a team up, we have Avengers, the X-Men all kind of working together, and what they do is they're going to go destroy the Mother Mold, and in doing so, we have this pretty cool scene where we have Psylocke fight Omega Sentinel, and Psylocke goes Psyblade right in the head, and Omega Sentinel, we'll talk about it in Frost Futures, Omega Sentinel, is a human that was built upon, right? She, think RoboCop, but Sentinel, right? And there's a few of those, right? We've Sentinel Primes are like that. So, she Omega Sentinel is kind of pretty similar to a Sentinel Prime, actually. I hadn't really considered that. So she comes back to herself. She then has all her powers or whatever, but goes by Camia, and then the X-Men work, and they destroy the Mother Mold, and we have a Storm versus Nimrod face-off, which is super cool. This is a little bit more general than I go into a lot of my notable events, because this is actually still pretty recent. This is all within the last year of comics, so definitely check it out as of the recording date, of course. So with that, they're working to destroy the Mother Mold. We're gonna leave it there for now. Definitely check out. It's just ended, So we're not gonna go too big into that. Usually I don't worry about spoiler alerts on Frosty Features because like my first notable event, it's like 50 years old. But this one's pretty fresh. I'm surprised. Usually we don't get brand new characters in the Marvel continuity that come to Marvel Strike Force so fast. Omega Sentinel is very, very recent. So honestly, that's super cool, and it's very pro comics, which I love. And I find once again, I feel pretty lonely as far as content creators for Marvel Strike Force and the love of comics. So it's pretty cool that we're getting Omega Sentinel, even though she's not some big thing, and she really is only in the comics right now. So big thumbs up from Frosty Osty. So moving on, Marvel Strike Force doesn't care about power levels, but here at Frosty Features we do. Now the way that this works is if you are a multiversal threat, you can end all of reality, taking out not just your reality, but all of the multiverse in one go. Universal means that you are strong enough maybe to end your reality, hop on over to another reality, and end that one over there. Yeah. Cosmic means that you are a threat on a planetary scale, leveling things like small planetary bodies all the way up to things like solar systems or galaxies. Cosmic means that, that's what I just said. Nuclear means that you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, leveling things on the small end of a small city, all the way to taking out a small planetary body. Super Soldier means that you are beyond all capabilities of a human being, leveling things like a brick wall all the way up to a city block. City means that you are essentially on the same scale as a human being that is trained to the absolute and utter peak of humanity, right? Think Olympic athletes, right? So here we have a lot in Marvel. We have a lot of our ninjas, our spies, our secret agents, things like that. That's where we see our city level. And then there's Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that is spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force. And without an undead team, without a Hela, without a chance, left on his own devices, Greg is not worth a whole bunch. So here on Frosty Features, we equate Greg to that of a regular human being. So in the event that I'm at a swap meet and I've got just the coolest collection of Beanie Babies from the 90s, and I meet Greg at the swap meet, I'm like, hey Greg, these are worth way more than you're saying that you'll buy them for. And Greg's like, no, they're not. Watch how worthless they are. And then he picks up my mint-condition tipsy Beanie Baby. I don't know if that actually exists or not. That's a Teletubby guy. I don't know. It could. He picks it up, mint condition. He rips it up right in front of me, and I deck him in his Greg face, right? So in this situation, theoretically, I, as a regular, normal human being, could take out Greg, right? In the case of the Sentinels, we have a robot at the baseline that is there to be able to kill or capture or incapacitate mutants, which mutants at a base level more often than not are higher than that of humans. We are automatically at a super soldier rating. Different types of Sentinels, Omega Sentinel, Nimrod, and things like that, can go significantly higher. We are looking at baseline only here. So we're going to say it's super soldier because very often, more often than not, we have Sentinels are there to be knocked over, right? They are not, other than like specifically the Genoshan Massacre, they're not the big bad, right? They are the thing to knock over to get to the boss, right? Being like Master Mold, Nimrod, Omega Sentinel, etc. Right? Super Soldier's where we're at. And according to Scopely, honestly, the blog post isn't that bad. It's general. I like that it points out its own lore and things like that, but it really feels like the character should be Master Mold. I've said it multiple times in this feature. Everybody said it in every stream. Why isn't he Master Mold? He literally, the purpose of Sentinel in the game is to bring more Sentinels there. Why isn't he Master Mold? And Sentinels could be minions. Like, what the heck? So I think it's a good it's a good blog post for Sentinels, but Sentinel in the game doesn't feel like Sentinel. He feels like freaking Master Mold. That's Frosty Feature Sentinel. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Please let me know your favorite Sentinel moments in the comments, or if I got anything wrong, I'd love to hear it. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks. And as a reminder, I stream at Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, where we do Frosty Features Live. I hope that you all had a fantastic time. Hope that you all have a fantastic weekend. And most importantly, stay cool.